Proportional Response, Book 1. Chapter 14, Part 5, Promises and Secrets. Hannibal sat perfectly still, staring in wonder at the scene playing out before him. He'd heard stories of men pledging fealty in this fashion, and knew that it still happened occasionally, but to see it before his own eyes, and from a human no less, he felt Vashna's hand tighten on his, and stole a look at her. She had that small, knowing smile on her face, and her eyes were riveted on the scene before her. It is moments like this that make the job worthwhile. To be in the middle of history, of events like the old stories, to have a front row seat to it all. The Duke grasped John's outstretched hand to help him up as they both rose. Hannibal sat in wonder as he looked at the human and saw tears run down the hardest face he had ever known. The Duke then turned to Henry, who had come out of his reverie to watch the pledge with a guarded countenance. Hannibal felt sadness for his friend, though he couldn't identify why, as Henry stood and walked over to the bar. Eldia started to rise, then thought better of it. Henry drained his glass, grabbed a bottle of whiskey so strong Hannibal could smell it all the way from his seat when it was uncorked, started to pour, looked at the bottle and took a long deep swig from it instead. His friend then slammed the bottle down hard enough to make the small bar rattle and turned to John. He could see unshed tears had formed at the corners of Henry's eyes as he spoke.
An accident. A bad reaction by a trigger-happy recruit. That is what the patrol ship who killed your captain claimed. If you had stayed, John, if only you had stayed, I have reviewed the intelligence reports from that incident you spoke of, and now I wish I had done so sooner. But so much comes across my desk, and my task has me focusing on things outside Confederated space.
Henry shook himself.
Yes, the Halistafar government tried to give orders that your ship be destroyed on sight. Those orders were illegal, and the captain of the Dauntless had no intention of following them. It is the opinion of our intel people that they knew you'd cracked that cipher and were deliberately using it so you would hear those orders. The reason you escaped was that the Captain Krantz chose to yell at the patrol captain and the Halistafar government to get that patrol ship, or that captain, or at least the ship's logs turned over to him. In the end, they claimed that they thought the escape pod was some form of ordnance that had been the start of an attack.
Henry took another swig from the bottle, shook his head and grimaced.
The Dauntless acquired weapons lock on that patrol ship as soon as it fired, and I suspect that is the only reason you are standing here today. By the time Captain Krantz had given up trying to fight the Halistafar Stonewall, you were out of even his ship's sensor range, and your trail cold enough he couldn't follow.
John turned to face Henry squarely, and his eyebrows furled.
That would have taken...
Henry nodded.
Days. Krantz spent days fighting the supposed religious bureaucracy, trying to get something he could use, something he could take back to Confederated military command, all while they screamed at him to chase you down.
Henry harumphed.
I suspect part of the reason he stayed so long, fighting them, even after it was obviously hopeless, was that he decided to let you get away. His report is long, detailed, and damning. He made it clear, carefully and subtly, that he thought something was very wrong in the system, and that he didn't believe their religious isolation claim for a moment.
John made a rude sound.
The only religion that exists in the Halistafar system is the religion of pull. Who you know, who they know, and what skeletons you can drag out on someone. A large portion of the population.
Henry waved the bottle at John to interrupt, then walked forward and poured the man a drink.
I understand. The old leaders you speak of, I know who they are. I should have known they weren't dead. You see, I grew up when they were trying, the first time, to make the world work the way you describe. They were taking advice from certain Venter who had hidden goals.
John's eyes narrowed, but Henry just shook his head.
That is another matter for another time. You can take it up with the Duke. Just know that we owe the Venter much, despite it all. Anyway, when I grew up, the same people you mentioned were trying to remake Earth in the image you describe. Thankfully, they failed. I thought they were dead. We carted them all up and put them on transport to one of the early colonies. They'd already had longevity treatments. They got the first ones, after all, so we knew they'd be around for a while, and we couldn't just kill them.
Fury painted John's face, and his cheeks went red.
Why the hell not? It could have...
Henry cut him off.
There were reasons, extremely good reasons. Again, a story for another time. Suffice it to say, the best thing we could do was send them off to live in a semi-penal colony under assumed identities with as few people as possible knowing who they were. Long story short, a number of them managed to steal a freighter and get away. The Confederated patrol gave chase, of course, but all they found was debris falling into a gas giant. The patrol did the best they could to determine whether it was a deception, but nothing turned up, and the ship was considered lost.
Henry got that faraway look again as his face rose toward the unseen sky.
Obviously, they were wrong.
Henry shook himself and turned back to John.
Confederated intelligence has been suspicious of the HFY government for some time. No one ever leaves, and even the most isolationist religious colonies have a percentage of the population leave every year, yet almost no one from there ever does, and the handful of freighters based from there consist of officers and indentures.
John shook his head.
Oh, you can never leave, that is for sure. Once they get you, they have you. Indentureship there means slave, make no mistake.
Henry nodded.
I don't doubt your word, John. Not anymore. The thing is, part of the Confederated Charter includes the right to move away from where you live. Even if you are under an indentureship contract, an indenture has the right to petition to have his contract sold, and can specify that they want it sold out system. There have been no postings from the HFY system since before you were born. I checked.
John turned away from Henry and spoke in a soft voice, which slowly got louder.
Damn you, damn your system, and damn your confederation. We have suffered for generations, and you and yours sat by and did nothing.
John spun and shook a finger at Henry.
Don't you stand there and preach to me about confederated law, about what is and isn't allowed. It is being done 1,000,000 times a day, because you and yours have...
Fire flashed in Henry's eyes, and Annabel had to resist an urge to come to his bond-minus brother's defense as Henry spoke.
Been trying to investigate, trying to find something, and trying to send spies in, while trying to manage 1,000 other fires and keep the Yoltons from wiping humanity off the face of the galaxy. The Confederated Intelligence Bureau has been trying to insert spies ever since the incident with you. All but 3 have been found and bounced or mysteriously died. Of those 3, 2 chose to convert to the blessed religion and stay. The only one who returned reported that the system was locked down hard by a stifling religion that has everyone brainwashed into thinking that the rest of the universe is no place to live, and that is why no one leaves. No one really believed him, of course, and he has been shuffled to a desk job. All of that agent's accounts and movements are closely monitored, but there have been no indications yet that he was bought. The Confederation has been trying diplomatic channels as well, of course, but those were exhausted years ago, and the inability to get anything in the way of intelligence out of there has stymied us. It takes more than suspicion and isolation to legally marshal a confederated military. Your testimony, though, that can change all of that.
John sneered at Henry.
My testimony. A convicted pirate accused of billions of credits of theft and destruction, not to mention an order of magnitude more than even the murders I am guilty of. And your intelligence services are going to take my word? Don't make me laugh.
Henry didn't miss a beat.
Yes, they will, because I will vouch for you, personally.
He held up both hands as John prepared to launch into another tirade.
It will take more than that, of course. Intel will need to fully debrief you, and you are going to have to go through everything you did, everything that happened, step by step. They will then need to verify what they can against what information we have. They will do it, though. Have a little faith in them. Or, if you don't want to do that, have a little faith in the man who is willing to go to bat for you, even though I liked some of those captains you killed more than I do you. So, yes, what you describe is wrong, is terrible, and will be fixed. On this, I give you my word. We will not be marshalling the fleet tomorrow, or even next week, or maybe not even next month, but it will...
A reptilian voice sounded from the corner of the room with a suddenness that nearly made Annibal leap from his chair.
Have to happen far sooner than you think.
Raffinir Ankaro sat gazing at all of them. Why is he in here? When did he get in here? I didn't even hear him come in. I know the man was a lawyer in the Zoltan Republic, and he seems to be a good enough fellow, but... Henry turned to Raffinir expectantly and lifted an eyebrow. Everyone else turned to Henry and seemed to be asking him the questions that had gone through his mind. Henry looked at them all and spoke.
Most of you have met Raffineer. What only the Colonel here knows is that the man wasn't just a lawyer back in the Zoltan Republic. He was an information broker for one of the major houses on that world and had amassed a tidy sum on the side. What none of the people he worked for knew was that he often used his connections and ability to get things done to help regular people out of sticky situations.
Raffineer's upper lip moved down over his lower lip in the Zoltan equivalent of a blush. The things I notice and remember at times like this. The man held up a hand to forestall the praise.
I am not as noble and honorable as our esteemed host here tries to make me out to be. The first time I helped someone disappear, it was my sister who had caught the eye of a voter and didn't want it. The second time, it was because someone found out about my sister and simultaneously threatened to out me while offering a lot of money.
The Zoltan gave them all a tight-lipped smile.
I became good at it, and it brought me a lot of money. I also liked doing it. It felt good to stick it to the voters, and please understand, I would never have admitted this at the time, even to myself. It felt good being able to help people. So, I did the job for whatever people could afford. Sometimes I was paid handsomely, sometimes I got a handful of bread. Always, I got a feeling of pride.
Hannibal looked around the room. Even John seemed to be listening closely as the man continued.
Then the annexation happened, and the voters expected their loyal information man to come with them. And voters don't take it well when you don't do what they expect. Long story short, I ended up having to smuggle myself into hiding. I knew what was coming, and thanks to my information skills, had just enough information to believe life would be better under the humans. So, long story short, I brought my files to the first human who seemed like he'd know what to do with them, and me, and I ended up here on Henry's intel analysis team. It has been an interesting job, to say the least.
He nodded to Henry. In acknowledgement or appreciation, Hannibal wasn't sure. Henry smiled back at him and spoke.
See, all that, and humble too.
Everyone chuckled a little, and Hannibal felt Vashna shift slightly to get a better look at the Zoltan as Henry continued.
Thank you for giving everyone here your bona fides, Ranfa. That was expedient. Now, you spoke up initially because you were trying to make a point.
Henry's chin dropped slightly, and everyone turned to look at Raffineer, who gave a half smile and answered.
Halistafar has been buying indentured contracts left and right and shipping them into the system in batch lots. For the last 2 years, none of those contracts have come up for reassignment, which is very odd. Even more odd, the spies that we inserted in with those indentures have not made contact. And the leadership of that system have to know that we are getting close to invoking the Articles of Intervention and sending a fleet.
Henry nodded, his brows furled.
I hadn't heard the part about the indentures. Wait, there is something else about Halistafar. I had a report on something just a couple of weeks ago about them making a rare contact and asking for something.
Raffineer sat back and shook his head.
I'm not surprised you haven't put the things together yet, boss. You have been deliberately distancing yourself from the particular project they are involved in. The project that is scheduled to complete in about 5 months, and the few pictures of which we have managed from freighters suggest their Project Phoenix is ahead of schedule.
Henry stood ramrod straight, and a look of abject horror came across his face so extreme that Eldia bolted from her own chair to put an arm around him. He locked eyes with Raffineer and spoke in a pained voice.
Phoenix. Fuck.
Raffineer started to speak, but Henry was headed for the door so fast that Hannibal feared he'd bowl someone over.
I'm sorry everyone, but I have a lot of calls I have to make. Right now. Colonel, please make sure our guests are comfortable and stay as long as they wish. Raffineer, with me.
Hannibal tried to stand and protest, to ask for information, but Henry just shot him a look which clearly meant later, and bounded out the door with Eldia and Raffineer trailing behind. He looked around the room, and everyone seemed to be equally confused. John finally asked the question.
What is Project Phoenix?